Hello and welcome to How Do Artists? How Do Artists is a show that focuses on a single topic of conversation and asks the question, how do artists live, work, play, run their business, stay inspired, or handle challenges and adversity from an artist perspective? Our show will speak with a diverse group of artists and creatives, and you, as our listeners, will have a chance to ask your questions during our Q&A segment towards the end of our show. I am your co-host, Ryan Caldwell, musician and producer, and I am joined by co-host Karlana Pedersen, artist and illustrator.
Hey. Well, all right. Tonight's topic is how do artists build a studio? Tonight, we're going to discuss how painters, musicians, and artists like ourselves create our work.
Oh, Karlana, seems like you've cut out there for a second. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm just going to go and pick up where she left off.
Arts will be a rather different process than a studio that will accommodate music and acoustics. Therefore, Ryan, being our musician, will discuss the importance of studios that are built properly for sound and acoustics.
That's absolutely right. Karlana, that is correct. When it comes to building a studio, your space is up to you, and it could be at home or anywhere you have available space. But here are the main topics we're going to dive into to get you started on your own project. So we will review our own private studios and how we created them. We're also going to talk about the difference between a studio and a creative space. And we're also going to go and boil it all down to 7 quick tips at the end of our show. So yeah, get ready.
Sounds great.
All right. So let's jump right into the main heated part of that. So what's the difference between a studio and a creative space? Because I mean, I am definitely in the camp of they're the same thing, or that if you call your studio a creative space, it's kind of patronizing, if that makes sense. Where it's like using that terminology is a way to go and kind of separate the wheat from the chaff, separate the experts from those who are just amateurs, you know? Like amateurs have a creative space, but artists have studios. You like that whole concept.
Yeah, and I don't know if I thought about it in that context before, but I definitely, and this very well may have come from the photographer side of me.
Right.
Because right now, I'm painting really wherever I can put my brush down in my home at this moment. And I'm lucky to be able to have a dedicated space to do that. But photography is much different. So when I still do consider myself a photographer because I still take pictures, but my studio has changed remarkably. It's not the same than when I had an actual photography studio in my home working with clients. So I think the idea of having a studio was always very specific in my head. So and then when I left, or when I decided to convert my space into a space that would accommodate me painting and drawing and being more multimedia, mixed media and multimedia, it felt more like a space to me, a creative space, because it had to be multifunctional. Whereas a studio, my photography studio, it was
a
dedicated,
single purpose sort of room.
Single purpose. Gotcha. And because you have to have specific equipment, it's not multifunctional in that way. So when I had when mom had her photography studio, that was the photography studio, and you weren't doing anything in there unless you were taking pictures with your own camera. I mean, your own stuff. But now my space is multi-purpose. It serves the function of whatever the art needs to be accomplished. Okay. So it feels more of a creative space, I guess, as opposed to a studio. But you have converted my way of thinking, Ryan, I will say, because now I look at it and say, oh, okay, well, it's a studio.
Well, and I do like the actual definition that I'm picking out of Google for this is a studio is a room where an artist, photographer, sculptor, etc. works.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair
And
enough.
so based on that definition, I mean, I think that what you have is a studio, but I do like, I don't know. I do like your perspective on that because like in plenty of ways, a studio is a very specific space, as in you can't be doing more than one art form in a studio
Right.
that is dedicated for that art form. Like
And
you're not going and, well, although there is a notable exception. Because, well, okay, so you think like photography studio, highly exclusive. You
right.
think of a
Music studio, highly exclusive.
very exclusive. Like you're
Right.
not doing, like the only other art you're making in a music studio is the occasional photo shoot of the people
you being
working
in the
studio.
Or maybe writing. A lot of times we wrote in this when we were in the sound studio. You know,
yeah. I mean, well,
if you're writing music.
but you can do that anywhere.
You can do that anywhere,
Um,
but it's music related. So
well,
you're
and
not
then
doing
so
anything else.
we're thinking of that, or like a painting studio is specifically something set up for painting. You're not going and writing in the painting studio necessarily. However, the big notable exception to that, like as far as nomenclature is concerned, is the movie studio.
Yes, that's
Because
true.
a movie studio is both a company and a place and a collection of multidisciplinary artists.
Yes.
Or a
Soundscape.
multidisciplinary collection of artists. That's how to phrase that.
Yeah.
Because they're all still basically doing one thing, unless it's an indie studio, in which case,
Or an animation studio.
oh
So
yeah. Well, actually, and even in that sense, a bunch of them might only be doing like the one job the entire time.
right.
Like
Yeah.
I feel
So in that
I draw
sense-
Ralph's nose. Okay, yeah.
So why don't you talk to us about how you developed your studio and
Oh boy.
you talk about because your studio is for its main purpose of music and production.
That is true.
So what happens with that?
Well, that is a fantastic. So if anyone's wondering, my background here has changed. This is largely. Oh no! You've uncovered my secret. My webcam is also a cell phone, which is why my picture quality is so bomb. But yeah, check that out. I got like a mixer and I got stuff and a piano and
That's really awesome. Now this is your new space.
Yeah. This is my new control room.
Nice.
I have been a subterranean troglodytic basement dweller for a bit now. And it's been great. It's been fantastic, but I'm ready to live in a room with windows. But yeah, so
Gotcha.
like I've been making like, because as an artist, if you have the broader sense of what a studio is, then from day one, you need a studio of some sort. Like even performers just have their own studio to go and rehearse by themselves and practice and whatnot. And if you don't have one, you need to find one or get one or make one, because it's impossible to go and be an artist or a creative in any sense without a place to work. Even if that place is just your dining room table, right? Or even if that practice spot's just your bedroom. You gotta have somewhere. So I've had struggles with that for my entire life thus far. Mainly like when I was in high school and starting to get into like recording and working on music and playing in bands. I think my first actual music studio was the old dining room that my parents had, because they moved the new one out to a new addition in the house, and I just got to steal the old one. And it was a horrible studio from a lot of standpoints. The acoustics were non-existent. We thought hanging a curtain over the doorway would be adequate soundproofing for a drum set that I was actively practicing at the time. And yeah, I wasn't actually recording audio at that point. I was recording. I wasn't. No, yeah. I was just working in a notation software. I was working in Sibelius.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it was all like MIDI controller, punching in individual notes, which I definitely recommend as a way to learn how to go and use that stuff. It's a very stripped down way to do it. But that was a bad studio. Noise bleed was everywhere. After that, it got moved directly up to my bedroom. And then after that, I was in college, so it was a non-issue. In which case, my studio manifested itself in dorm rooms, mostly mine. But that was also good because during that, like when I was in college, I got to go and observe a lot of different studios in a lot of different places. interning or doing like lectures and workshops. And so, after I got out of college, I basically commandeered a room. It was on like the second floor of this kind of dairy barn from the 1800s. And it was this part that jutted off. The downstairs was like a tool room, sort of machine room place with the furnaces and stuff like that. But the top part was this grain shed, like an old school grain shed. So all these boards were packed super tightly together, forming the whole perimeter of the thing. No windows. It was a great spot for exactly what I needed, except that it was very small, very, very small space. But in a lot of ways, it was fantastic because it was only connected to the rest of the building by one wall. And given that I was living there with my parents at the time, it was very important for me to go and be able to push the volume when they were sleeping because, needing freedom to go and record stuff. But anyhow, so my setup dwelled in there for a long time and went through many different iterations. And then finally I got my own home studio in this house right here that was in the basement forever. And I actually did some build out stuff in the basement to go and thicken the ceiling to go and prevent as much of that like mechanical transfer from people walking around on top of my head and stuff like that. And I got really, really obsessed with acoustics before I did that, and was trying to go and get my biggest, or at least get the most out of that. So, regardless, I do have some studio notes that I took about this. Some things that I think would be helpful insights for anyone who is going to try and build a studio. Because it's not always like. I don't know. Plenty of this stuff you don't know until you're in the weeds of it. And having beaten my head into this particular animal in this specific vein for so long, I've got some nuggets. And the first big nugget I got is you got to figure out your wants and needs. Figure out your wants and needs. Figure out what you actually need the space for and what you need to do there. Especially for like music. Are you going to be recording vocals there? Are you not going to be recording vocals there? Are you going to be recording live audio? Is it just a beat studio? Do you want to go and have a control room and a live room? Are you planning on recording bands? Are you planning on just recording yourself? Like these are just all questions you have to ask. And it's mostly because it's really easy to get into a place where you want more than you basically you want it to be more functional than you actually need it to be for what you're doing, like in a photography studio, you don't need to be able to photograph a real life elephant in there. It does not have to be that big. There is no necessary benefit the rest of the time that you're not filming live elephants.
Well, that would depend. I would say for a home studio, you're absolutely right. But there are, of course, commercial studios that are huge and enormous that could fit an elephant. And there's always the need for those studios. So if absolutely.
But the beautiful thing about those is you can rent them. Someone else can pay all the utilities for having those giant ceilings in the middle of a winter hellscape. And
exactly.
Well, and actually, and that is a great segue because you don't need to have all the stuff in your studio. You just need what you need on the day to day. Anything that you can go and just rent when you need it, do that. Yeah, save yourself the overhead. Yeah. Well, and
for the most part.
Well, and that's the other interesting thing with the wants and needs bit is acoustics. That's my second tip: is get a working understanding of acoustics. Just do it. It's not that hard. There's a very finite number of rules, and I've even broken it down. You need to learn the difference between sound absorption and sound proofing. Sound absorption is where that's the foam that you see up, right? And the sound panels. And that's where you go and you take that live vibrating audio. Why am I holding a screwdriver? You take that live vibrating audio and then you go and convert it using the squishy stuff into a minute amount of heat. And when you do that, you take that sound out of the air. Energy can't be created or destroyed. That's basically how that works. So basically, you need sound absorption to go and handle the sound that's in a room. Right now, You could probably hear that because I have none. I have like a carpet, but it's not thick. So I need to start getting my sound absorption game down. The other part is soundproofing. By and large, and looks like Karlana jumped out of here, but I'm going to carry this torch on my own and ramble about acoustics for a bit. Oh, and she's back. Look at that. Yeah, in building difficulties, we are having slight, what do you call it? We were having some slight internet issues.
Technical.
But the show goes on.
That's
but
right.
So soundproofing is keeping sound where you want it. So that's, the stuff where when I was younger, I would have benefited from having some good soundproofing in that room to go and prevent the drum set sound from leaking into the rest of the house. Right.
Right.
But tons of times, I mean, there's just so many misconceptions and misinformation with this. People expect sound absorption to do the job of soundproofing. Like, oh, I want to go and contain that audio. I'm going to put up some sound panels. And yes, it will help by technical definition. It will not do what you need it to, though.
Right.
Same thing with like putting carpet on the walls. In general, yeah,
I
right.
remember that.
Oh yeah, the carpet on the walls and the egg crate, the egg crate foam.
Were popular back when.
Oh yeah, back in the 80s, that was standard operating procedure, and they were still wrong.
And it didn't really help, and you're always wondering,
does.
Why doesn't it do what I really want it to do?
So the reason and the funny thing about that is the egg crate foam stuff only helps just a tiny bit it helps just enough to be perceivable. And that's because the sonic artifacts you hear from sound bouncing back and forth between walls.
Right.
That's large. The most noticeable stuff in there is all the high-end information, like your S's and your T's, all that stuff. And that is the stuff that carpeting and that egg crate foam and the Oral X foam too. Oh yeah, Oral X. Yeah, you're not excluded. Oh yeah, no. And Oral X does. They do make some great products, and they also have a good full spectrum absorber out that's made of foam. But generally speaking, they're like their budget foam or their standard foam is really only as effective as the egg crate stuff, where it's just the material is just soaking up only like maybe that top fourth or top third if you're lucky, if you get the really nice stuff.
So is this stuff that people on a budget can get,
nope.
or?
Well, yes. Okay. So if you're on a budget, don't buy foam. If you're even not on a budget, I still don't recommend foam.
Right.
But basically, if you're buying absorption, you can just make your own soundproofing. You can just do that. You just go and buy like some just semi-solid insulation, either rock wool or fiberglass. It's like Owens Corning. I forget the number that goes after that, but Roxol Rockboard 60 or Roxol Rockboard 80. I think there's a 40 too. But those are basically just different densities of the same stuff. But that's the stuff that really soaks up that sound. That's the active ingredient in all the sound, like professional sound panels you see. And I'm still not talking about the crinkly foam stuff, like the actual fabric covered sound panels that really do a lot of work. You can get the same quantity for vastly cheaper as you would the foam, and it'll be more effective. It's kind of one of those no-brainer things. But the problem is that if you want to have it for less money, you have to go and build them yourself, and you can just look that up online. But it's and
there's easier ways. You can get canvases and line the backs of canvases with it too, then just seal it with
tons of people do
plywood.
Yeah,
and there you have your sealed sound panels.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, none of this stuff is hard. If anyone wants to call me, I can go and help you through it. But yeah, the some other fun things are soundproofing makes your acoustics worse, because soundproofing is a lot of going and preventing air gaps and preventing air from moving anywhere. And unfortunately, that air movement is also what goes and makes your acoustics better, because it keeps the sound from bouncing back at you and creating more room nodes and anomalies and weird stuff, especially with bass frequencies, which are the ones you want to go and keep isolated as much as possible in the first place. Like if you have a home studio and you have other people living with you, you don't want them to have to deal with your bass all the time. But if you slap up too many more sheets of drywall to keep that stuff in, you're actually going to go and leave it nowhere to escape to. So you're just not going to be able to mix bass in your studio anyhow. It's kind of it's a catch-22 sort of thing.
So what do you do?
Be realistic with your needs. Be realistic. Don't think of like what the best possible, because that's a trap I fell into when I was designing my studio right here, like 4 years ago. Thinking like, okay, I need to have the whole thing like airtight, soundproof. I'm going to replace the doors with solid core doors. Going to do all this stuff. And yeah, would that have helped a couple times? Oh, sure. Oh, especially when I was trying to do rehearsals in there or like super, super loud stuff while other people might have been trying to sleep. That would have been super useful. But the problem is that 9 times out of 10, I did not need the extra layer of ceiling I put on there, or at least I don't think I did. I don't even know how effective that was aside from just slapping another piece of drywall on there. Right. So the main thing is you can save yourself a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money by going and just saying, okay, how annoying am I going to be? How loud is this going to be for everyone else around? Can I just go and restrict the hours that I'm doing this a little bit and save myself $3,000? It's that sort of concept. Do I have to have a space that is acoustically perfect for this, or can I just rent one if I need to record a band and they're paying me? Like, you could just do that. That's the doable thing. So, but yeah, so in sound stuff, the simplest solution is often the best. That's a thing. Next stuff, because that was only acoustics, but luckily that's the thing I had the most to say about, because I have strong feelings on acoustic treatment and sound absorption. And you should. The amount of like spend. Here's another quick little tidbit, and you can find this on a million lists online already, but it needs to be drilled in home. Your studio monitors, how nice they are, does not matter. You could use like normal stereo speakers if you so desired. It doesn't matter at all if your acoustics are bad. If you have bad acoustics in your room, and I'm not talking like on a scale of bad to perfect, yours are bad and not perfect. I'm talking like if they're not even halfway, you're not getting an accurate picture. It doesn't matter. It's like going and doing color correction on a monitor from the 1950s.
Or it's like doing color correction on a picture you've blown out the exposure.
It's like doing color correction with beer goggles. That's actually the most accurate parallel I can think of, because the problem is that the sound keeps bouncing around and you're hearing that going and hitting the sound that comes here, because sound can hit itself like that, which is crazy, and creates these phase cancellations and you don't even know what you're hearing. And instead of that, just pick up a set of headphones. Just do that. It's easy. A set of nice open back headphones maybe runs you $1,000. And if you could do that, get some with flat, even response, mix on those until you get your acoustic treatment figured out. Otherwise, your monitors are just for your clients if you have them. And another one that's right along there, meditate on your routing. You got to figure out how you want your whole thing to flow as far as electricity is concerned, right? So like where you're setting your mics up, what cable runs you need to do, how you're going to hide those runs, where you're going to put them, are they going in corners, how's all that stuff working? Like me in my studio, I just got this giant mixing board and I have kind of gone overboard on routing, which I'm very excited about. Like, I got that big board.
I can tell you're excited about
I just need those routing capabilities. Like, I'm going to wire myself up a spring reverb and it's going to be fun. Nice. And I can hit it with my fist when I want like it to go strong. It'll be great.
Sweet.
Well, and I also have a bunch of I've got a bunch of synthesizers I'm routing through here to go and bring back into my computer. And I also need to go and send like headphone stuff down to the studio and reamp stuff down there. Cool. And I think that really goes and plays into my next point, which is it's important to make the right thing that you need to be doing at any point in time the easiest thing to do, which is kind of a design philosophy I'm trying to really take home. It's like going and making sure you keep the thing that you're trying to find in the first place you look for it, like just stuff like that, to go and streamline your whole everything. So like, instruments and cases don't get played. If you have an instrument and you're keeping it in its case, you're going to touch it way less than if it's staring you in the face, because if you don't see it, it doesn't exist.
That's true.
So, or another one, like our brains just like comfortable and cool looking rooms, right? We like
Right.
rooms that feel nice, that we want to spend time in. Same thing,
Right.
or it's like it's easier to stay awake longer if you're around brighter light because it tricks your brain into thinking that it's the daytime. So, or like for me, I made sure to go and put my studio in a room with a window where I can see the
Oh,
sky because
nice.
I need that so bad. I mean, and
Yeah.
yes, it's actually worse for the acoustics in a lot of ways.
I was just gonna say you got a window in there, so
Yeah, right. It's not great. My room's not parallel. I'm not even centered. I'm not even centered in my room. But it's okay. I mean,
it's all good.
well, and that's what you listen on headphones, you do a lot of referencing,
Right.
you go on different speakers to figure out what you're doing and how that is affecting your space. The stuff's not insurmountable, but yeah. No, the making the right thing to do, the easiest thing to do is super, super, super important. And that's actually one of the reasons why I went so overboard with the routing, is to make it so, because I have a lot of cool outboard gear, but I don't have any easy way to actually use it, right? Like, if I have to go and get up from my chair, plug something in and unplug something and then dial in the gain and then dial in the setting, that's already way too much work for something I could have done in 3 clicks in my software.
Right.
So, I mean, a sane and logical person would say, well, then just ditch the analog stuff and go software. What's wrong with you? And part of me also grapples with that, and every single time I have to do anything. But it's there's some mojo you miss, there's some muscle memory you miss. Anyhow, I'm getting off the rails. The next thing I got is invest in ergonomics.
Oh, that's key.
Yeah,
Key.
Well, and
You're
that's
sitting
also
in a chair all day or for
no,
hours.
you got to make sure you're sitting in a good chair. I have my split keyboard here. Yeah, it's crazy. But I did that because when I was spending several hours a day in my studio, I realized, I was hunched over. I was hunched over my keyboard, and I was going and looking down at my laptop screen the whole time, trying to use that mouse and keyboard. And I was like, oh my God, I need to fix this because my neck is hurting so bad all the time.
And that's like an office situation for you because you're sitting at the board primarily.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. No, I'm just right here all day. So anyhow, if you invest in that, it saves you hospital bills later, which is good. It's,
saves you physical therapy.
Well, and nothing's exciting or sexy about it, but it's still really, I mean, technically
it's a necessity.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. Okay, and then I only have 2 more, and then we're off of my segment, on to your segment, and I will leave the floor. I'll levitate.
You'll levitate.
Set aside an appropriate budget. Set aside an appropriate budget for your studio.
Yes, we have a few things in common, and that's one of them.
Oh, I'd believe that. Well, it's mostly to anyone who's like, well, what if I'm broke? And I'm like, I understand that. I understand that real well. I have been trying to design a recording studio since before I had any budget. Since, before I graduated high school. And it gets easier, thankfully, the more money you get. But it's one of those things where if you set there's a balance to it. So you don't need all the stuff, thankfully, when you're first starting out. You just need to solve the problems that you have.
Right.
So if you're very realistic about those problems, then you can go and be very realistic about those solutions.
And I think building a studio is like building a business. If you start off with too much money, you if you watch Shark Tank, you see a lot of entrepreneurs coming in and they just blew up to millions of dollars on whatever it is that they're trying to get a deal on in the tank. And the problem wasn't necessarily that they didn't have a great idea. It's they had too much money to start with. And they did all these unnecessary things as a result. And I feel like building a studio is like that. So
you have to be you have to be very almost utilitarian about it. Because the more you get excited about stuff, the less effective you're going to be. It's just, I mean, you're going to basically, because it's not like stuff's bad. I have a lot of great stuff. I love my stuff. Stuff is fantastic.
Sure.
Like look at that thing. That's great.
Stuff is awesome. But it's got to be the right stuff. It has to be the stuff that works.
And nothing nothing you're going to get is going to give you markedly better results. Like some stuff you can give you better results. However, the stuff that you're most excited about probably won't. Anything that like the budget or like the marketing grabbed you, like, oh, I need that. Yeah, that's going to help you out for like the 1-2 projects you use that particular device on or thing. And then it's going to sit there and collect dust for most of the rest of the time. And you didn't really need it in the first place, did you? You could have faked something, couldn't you? Yeah, you could have, Karlana. Well, that's not directed at you. That's all directed at me. Because it's the guitar pedal. It's the compressor. It's the plugin. At least plugins don't collect dust. That's great.
Because you're also fighting this. I feel like some musicians are fighting this collector's habit. Like if you're into synths or if you're into guitars, then you want the whole gamut of things that come with it.
Oh, I want the whole gamut.
And so that can be a problem if you're trying to streamline your studio.
Actually,
space.
Have you ever heard of GAS? Well, like not flatulence, but gear acquisition syndrome.
Yes, I have heard of that.
So to anyone on the internet,
I don't know if I've heard of someone calling it gas, though.
That's the shorthand for people. So like I'm in some synthesizer groups and stuff
gear
like that.
Acquisition, yes.
Oh yeah. And gear acquisition syndrome is like, it's an addiction like any other addiction. It's like a gambling addiction, but you're gambling on yourself.
You know what?
It's like a gambling addiction with worse odds. Somehow.
But jewelry design, you know what?
Oh yeah.
I designed jewelry for years.
Oh gosh, stonework is the worst.
Oh my goodness.
You can just keep, and they're expensive.
Oh yes, I used to design jewelry with all these beautiful Swarovski crystals and stones and jade, and I had thousands of these things in my house, and I'm like, okay, I've got to stop.
Yeah, right.
I can't do this anymore.
And luckily, I came from a couple. Both of my parents are visual artists, and so I got to go and see their studios when I was younger.
Right.
And so, I mean, enough of that's been imparted into me. But like my father is a very multidisciplinary craftsman of a lot of different physical things. So like metal sculpture, wood sculpture, but also just your standard handyman work and do-it-yourselfing stuff. Like he takes the do-it-yourself thing to the next level. It's very he's operating at like a MacGyver caliber of do-it-yourselfing, where it's like we don't need to buy anything ever unless it's from a garage sale or a flea market.
Right.
And then my mother had a pneumatic loom.
Oh yeah,
one of her studios.
Telling me about that.
I talked to them recently, and apparently they ran air up from a shed to the second story of the building
for their studio.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, just for that pneumatic loom. Yeah. And apparently they just patched up the drywall and left all that there when they moved out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Ryan, we've got a lot in common in terms of our studio needs.
I do have one last thing.
Oh, okay.
I have one last thing, which is just don't be afraid to experiment. None of my setups have been perfect, and I'm hoping I'm not cursed by a perfect setup ever in my life. I hope there's always room to improve and things to change, because otherwise it would be insane. But yeah, like I've changed my setup so many times, and some things you can only learn from trial and error. Some things you can only learn by doing it poorly. Like sometimes you're just trying out things to even know the right questions you should be asking.
Right. Yeah. Experimentation is key. That's important. And especially when you're trying to get it right for what you need, your needs are going to change.
Yeah, they are.
Over time, your needs are going to change, so things are going to change.
Or even the things you think you need are going to change.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you're doing it, if you're creating a studio space because you are trying to run a business. Oh, and especially, I can't tell you how much has changed even since we moved back from Minnesota into our new home here, which we've only been here for now 2 years. Yeah,
because you're without a studio,
I'm without a studio. I moved away from well, I had a studio when I was in Illinois, then we moved to Minnesota, and then I didn't have a studio, and then I did have a studio, and then we moved back. And now I didn't have a studio anymore. And so it was one of those things where a lot of thought went into it prior. I mean, I already knew what I needed. So when we moved into our new home, we already knew, okay, we've got, I think the family already realized they had to isolate me. So,
otherwise you would take over everything.
It would be a takeover. So
like creep, you're like kudzu.
Everything would just sort of spread out. But in the process of doing that, since I had 2 studio spaces, and this will actually be my first artist space, as opposed to the 2 photography spaces. So this concept for me is sort of is new in that sense, where it's way more flexible and way more multi-purpose. So this particular room, and I can show you, I don't have my curtains up. My podcast curtains are usually behind me, but here you can see that I have a lot of storage space.
Oh, look at you. Oh, and for those in the podcast, there are just bins upon bins on some glorious steel racks.
500-pound weight racks, if I can say that. You could
fit at least 2 purple mattresses on that.
Purple mattresses. These I have, and thanks to my wonderful husband. Oh, and then I should show I have another rack.
I was hoping you just had your husband there on display.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of my husband, that's where I keep him. And oh, wait, one more time.
Show us about the house.
Show me what you were pointing at.
Oh, well, I have.
I saw a ring light.
Oh, yes. Well, I've got there's my podcast stuff, and there's my ring light over there.
Oh, look at that. Oh, look at the ring light. And another ring light.
And then there's another ring light. But that's another 500-pounder right there, where there's a rack where I hold all my canvases and my photo frames when I do framed artwork. But thanks to my hubby, he sort of found these 500-pound shelving units.
Nice.
So we designed it to be able to have all of my art equipment here. And really COVID sort of transitioned everything for me. So originally I was going to I have a table over here where I was going to do my paints, and I have another table that could be pulled up, folded up and put here. And this wall here was going to be for, actually doing the artwork with my easel and everything. So I could be contained in this room. Then COVID hit, and it really did change how we looked at space, even more so. And I will say, when we designed the house, when we came in and redesigned everything, we sat down and thought about a plan, not only for this room, but for how our kids were going to be with me in the space when they were at school.
Yeah.
And it was never really intended for them to be here all day. It really was, okay, the kids usually need me 2 or 3 hours out of my evening between the 2 of them. So upstairs.
So that's why you have your office up there too. Oh,
because
that makes
we
sense.
completely pulled out the dining room. We realized we don't use a formal dining room half as much as what we would need a flex space. So we created a flex space, and we bought a table that we could double as a conference table, and wired it so that we could get electricity to that table.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And then right now we're adjusting our data ports also in that room too. But it has my office desk and the 2 desks for the kids. But in 2019, I had an office that I'd go to in Geneva, and was building a team. So I was never really going to be here full time. It was just for when I needed to be at home during the space. COVID changed. Now everybody's home. So I was glad that we had that space upstairs because it really, really did test its functionality.
Mm.
And this space, instead of it being a full-time art space, it became a studio space because this is where now my podcast gets recorded. This is where private Zoom calls can be with my kids when they have to talk with their teachers, and everybody's upstairs in the flex space.
Yeah.
This room has become more of really a studio, but more of a Zoom studio, recording studio more than anything else. What really did work for me was that all of the space that I have in the back, the storage here is so functional that I can take out all of my inks and my paints and transform another part of the basement. So right now, if you go onto my Instagram account at Karlana Pedersen, you'll see pictures of my studio space where I actually paint. And the family has decided that they're fine with me taking over a small portion of the basement that no one was using to actually create the artwork there. If I need to, I can fold everything up, put everything back, and it all goes back here.
Yeah.
In this area where all the very well organized bins are. But the process to going that is you need to, before you can get to this end result where it's functioning, and it's not only functioning for me, but it's functioning for other members of the family too.
Yeah.
And being able to pivot and change what was originally going to be used for and to accommodate the change of our lifestyle really did require planning ahead of time. So much like you, it's the same. You have to sit down and figure out what your purpose of your studio would be. And then I go through, with everything that I do, I go through what I call the 5 W's. And it's the who, what, where, when, and why of any big project that I embark on. So who's going to use it? What do I want the studio for? Where do I want it to be? Where's the ideal place that I would want to have this if I'm creating the space for myself? When do I need to have it by? Is there a deadline? Is there a greater purpose? Is there a time constraint on that? And why do I need it? With that comes how much is all of that going to cost? Because once you start to detail what those 5 W's are, then you're going to really get into how much is that in my budget, and what do I need? To your point, what do I need that's essential to what I'm doing versus what maybe I'd like to have on my wish list, or what's really required, because that's going to really reflect your budget.
Yeah, even putting it in like a physical list, just like having, here's things I cannot sacrifice, here's things that are on the chopping block, and then whatever you have left after you get this stuff out of your budget is you start picking off, you very quickly find what parts of this stuff are the most important to you.
Exactly. Yeah, you will. Write them down. You will know from that point. And when you're starting to look at how much this can really cost, it's going to really determine, do I need that or do I not need that? Is that something that can go in the wait list? And then I sat down and I did an actual assessment of the studio. What are the pros and cons to the space? If I've designed it the way I'd like to have it designed, or if I'm changing a space in my existing home, what are the pros and cons to that process? For me, the pros were great functional space. Obviously, I have lots of storage, and it was able, this one room can accommodate multiple functions. So like I mentioned before, I can do the podcast here. It's a Zoom quiet room. It's my husband comes down here and he does office this is his office when he comes down here, and he needs to have privacy. And this is where my art storage is and where a lot of my production storage is. So those were the obvious pros. The cons, I outgrew it during COVID. I am using the adjacent game table in my game space in the basement. And so that was a con, which brings me to the next question that we can talk about. And that's after you've done your 5 W's, you've sat down with the who, what, where, when, and why, and you've done your budget. My only other tip would be do an honest assessment of your pros and cons. And if you need to consult a professional, then that should be on the list too. And we'll talk a little bit about that.
That's a thing. Yeah.
That is a thing. At what point do you need to call a professional, and who should those professionals possibly be? So we can kind of talk a little bit about that. But before we do, what happens? It's a twofold question, because we can talk about just space ideas. Mm-hmm. It's twofold, because I outgrew. We purposely sought out a home where we'd have an extra room, bonus room, to be able to accommodate my needs.
Yeah.
As a family, and then COVID hits and it changes things. What happens if you've done this and you've outgrown your space already?
Well, that's kind of the fun part with the experiment part. And also, I for a second I thought we were going to start talking about like Neil deGrasse Tyson style space. But no, home spaces. But spaces. I mean, I think that's enough. That's obviously an interesting thing. I think you can do a lot with a space without outgrowing it. I think but you will rapidly realize it's almost like you just have like a ticker on your wall, just being like, and that's another one for having as much space as I'd like, and that's another one for I'm too loud for this part. Well, this isn't going to work forever. But I mean, I don't know. I feel like I honestly feel like the biggest thing, like what you were hitting on, is like, are you a professional? Are you an amateur? What are you doing? Like, and that's not even a knock on quality. That's simply a knock on ROI. If you're looking to do something professionally, then it makes a huge difference, because then you actually have a budget. Then it's not the same, you're not taking away from your studio. Right. You're not taking away your studio money from your model train set money, right?
Right.
It's going to be all the same money. And so you can go and make the space, or like make or own a space. But like when I was on the biggest budget, my space, I had what I'd like to call a nomadic setup, which sounds very poetic and lovely, but it's essentially just, I had an interface and I had some microphones, I had some cables, I had a laptop, and I could bring those wherever I needed them to be. And I got some great results that way in some crazy places. Yeah.
There's something to be said for that, because that's sort of how I am. I feel like now I have right now my actual art space where I'm doing the art and I'm showing the videos of where I'm doing the art is in my little area in the basement, which is now where I'm doing my art. But I can just fold that stuff up and put them back in here when I need that space again. Yeah. So it's not permanent. It is more nomadic, like you were saying. And plus, being a digital illustrator, I can take my iPad and draw anywhere. And so that is mobile. Oh, yeah. And I think when people are doing their spaces, it's great to think about spaces maybe that you haven't considered. Like, normally people, when they say they are looking to create a bonus space or additional space, they think of the obvious, which is an extra bedroom or garage space. But there's the dining room, formal dining room. There's still a lot of homes that have formal dining room spaces. And how often do you actually use on a daily basis your formal dining room, especially when now there's adjacent family rooms attached to the kitchen, and there's huge islands or other breakfast areas that people are eating and spending time as a family. They're not necessarily using that dining room space. And we have successfully converted that dining room space to an actual flex space And that works well for us as office space and school space for the kids and for myself.
It's funny when you brought that up earlier, I started my brain went off on a tangent thinking like, oh, I do love non-typical names for like rooms in a home. I like having a parlor or like having a, not like
Parlor's
the social,
an old term,
not the social media app, mind you. I don't want that sort of parlor. I want nothing from that sort of parlor, but the, what was it? Or like having a study or having a lounge.
A lounge.
Oh yes, having a lounge
and
a
traditional names for rooms.
They've fallen out of fashion so hard that I want them more now.
You want them back?
Oh, it's like like a flex room where it's like, oh, I get that, but
flex room. That's what we have now.
Oh, but like. And I do like flex room. I like flex room, but I want to do away with mud room. I don't want mud room. I don't want a rumpus room.
The rumpus room, I agree with. Mud room, though, in the wintertime in Chicago, it's a mud room.
Oh, especially if you have children.
And if you have kids, it's a mud room.
Just like throwing their boots everywhere. There's just it's
water
chaos.
On the floor.
Water on the ceiling. How do they get it there?
I don't know. I have not experienced that part, but yeah. So, and then living room too. So we have family rooms and we have like man cave basements. The living room is often a room that is really kind of just for show. That can be turned into a flex space as well. And something to think about. I did see one artist who really used her living room as a display. As sort of like an artist display studio where the living room was sort of designed to be the centerpiece, had these big picture windows, and in the back was where the family room is and all the other rooms. But that you walk in to the home and then you see this big, living room space. And who actually uses their living room space very often? I mean, usually it's like a display piece. Yeah. I know one artist. I've seen one artist who did it. I don't know her personally, but I did see an artist who was working with an interior designer and came up with an idea to take the curtains off those windows and to use it as a display for her artwork. And so that became her open air studio space. And where the picture windows are, she hung artwork. And so it was a very interesting take on how she was able to incorporate her studio, her art studio, into the home by using the room that they never really used. And they have their family room, they have their kitchen where they dine, and not sure how she particularly uses her dining room, but I'm assuming since she did that with the living room, then, they have other traditional ways of using those rooms. But I thought that was interesting. So those are some ways that we can sort of look at interior design or home design differently if we get to the point where we're already running out of space.
Well, and in music, it's a huge trope, the bedroom studio. The bedroom studio is, being a bedroom producer, it goes hand in hand with like being a SoundCloud rapper. But people have been doing the bedroom studio thing since like digital really took over, just because you can. It's possible. You can just do that in the studio
if there was a bed in there, though. I'm assuming there's not. That was a joke, but
actually, there was a great one I saw. It was a picture online from like a DIY recording forum, and it was a guy surrounded by synthesizers, and in the middle was his bed. But they were like all on stands and stuff like that. And it's just like, oh, and this is just where you sleep. Oh, very nice. Bedroom studio.
Yes. That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, we should also mention, we talked a little bit about it, and that was, when do you need to hire a professional?
That's true.
When, some of the reason I say it's hand in hand with space ideas is because sometimes people want to use their garage space, or what's been popular is getting a mobile shed. And we did this also. We bought a mobile shed and turned it into like a man cave for our teenagers.
Oh.
And so we have a shed in our yard, and it's really, really adorable.
You know what the name for that is? It's about talking about place names.
I'm going to show you the pictures of it. It's adorable.
It's not a man cave. It's a playhouse.
It's a teen hangout. It's where the teenagers are going to go.
It's where the kids go and play. It's the playhouse.
And
but you can't call it that with teenagers.
No, you can't call it that. No. But it's got a seating arrangement. It's got a table. It's going to have a cooler in there in the summertime, and it's got a TV and game system and all this stuff. So the idea is that when COVID breaks and they have their friends back, they can have a space to themselves. But a lot of people, we got this idea because artists were getting mobile sheds and creating additional space, whether it's offices or whether it's studio spaces. Now, the only thing with mobile shed is you have to have a professional come and help you with it, most likely, because in our case, we had an electrician come out and run electrical wires and set up all the electrical in the house, the shed. And so we for sure hired somebody that came and did that for us. Plus, you might want to check with your local, your local.
You might need a building
permits for exactly, and find out what those rules are for having a living space made out of a shed. Some ordinances are totally fine with it, like in our area,
and it's different in every single town,
every town.
Everywhere. And I mean, even that's worth getting a local contractor. Just if they know how that stuff operates, getting someone to help you through the process can be super helpful.
Exactly. So contractors, electricians, sound acoustic professionals, if you're doing, that's right. If you're doing a sound studio, you may want to hire a professional to come in.
Yeah.
And especially balance that out.
Especially soundproofing, like all that happens at the building level. If you want anything soundproofed, you can't do that easily once a room's already built and furnished. You have to basically tear everything up and slap a whole new coat of drywall on stuff following parameters. Worst case, you build a room inside of a room, inside of a room, inside of a room. Anyhow, but
That's right.
Yeah.
But one thing that we had in common and that you had mentioned was you want to make the space your own. And so once it is finished, so you might want to hire a sound professional if you're building a sound studio before finishing or at the build stage.
Yeah.
But hiring an interior designer or an artist to come in and help with making it your own once it's built is very important also, because you want to be inspired and inspiration comes from creativity. So
it has to look cool. Has
to feel good to you. So whatever that means, you're not going to use it if it doesn't feel good to you.
Nope.
So with that said, are you ready to recap this?
Oh, let's quick recap this lest we go over an hour. All right. So real quick, my rundown as fast as I can do it is figure out your wants and needs, get a working understanding of acoustics. And if you are too confident in that idea, you probably don't have one yet. Meditate on your routing. Make the right thing to do the easiest thing to do in all circumstances. Invest in ergonomics. Ergonomics? That's not a word. Ergonomics. Is a G.
Not to be confused with Urkel, right?
Set aside an appropriate budget and don't be afraid to experiment. Things, none of these things are going to happen the first time, and you're going to learn stuff, and it's all part of the process. It's like working out.
That's right. That's right.
The other thing is don't think that you have to have a official studio to create art. You don't.
That's right.
You don't have to have one in any way, shape, or form. Like when I made some fantastic records when I was just working with a laptop. I made a film soundtrack out of a dorm room at one point.
Was
it amazing? It was fine, but I did it.
It was okay, but you did it.
It was listenable.
That's right.
Didn't make your ears bleed.
Stop it. but you are true. That is
Yeah.
a true statement. You do not need an official studio to do your craft.
Yeah.
With that said, if you so desire to have a creative space or a studio, whichever you prefer to call it, or however you feel it needs to be,
Study.
what you need to do is number one, create a plan. You need to know how you're going to use it before you begin and what does that entail. So create a plan, have a budget. Once you create a plan, you're going to have an idea of where things are going to go and how much it's going to cost. Anticipate growth. What happens if you're doing this for your work in your business and you start to expand? What does that mean in terms of your home studio? Assess the pros and cons to your project and have solutions ready. If you are having more cons than pros, then start creating solutions. Start figuring this out so that you can get what you need and get what you want. Repurpose unused space within the home. It's always a great idea. Repurpose garage space or look into a mobile shed. That's always an idea. Number 7, consult a pro if needed. And we briefly walked through what those pros look like. And so, yes, consult a pro. Never be afraid to ask questions. You don't need a full-blown studio to create your art. Be who you are and have fun doing it.
Well, is that it?
Isn't that enough? Isn't that all that we want in life?
That's fantastic. Honestly, the being flexible with spaces made me think of my entire childhood. And one of those things where it's like super normal until you start reflecting on it. It's like what I can only imagine what like people who have been in cults as children feel. They're like, or like people who were like raised in that, where it's like, oh, they're not supposed to do that with the anointing dagger. I don't understand.
What are you talking about?
Okay, so like as a child, my father had 3 studios and my mother had like 2.5.
Oh, you thought that was normal.
It was like, I thought that you would just use an entire 2-car garage for a metalworking studio, as well as a shed, as well as the entire basement. I thought it was fine to use both of the guest bedrooms and the second floor for textile work, because you have to have the weaving studio and the sewing studio.
These
true. Things are important,
especially with a pneumatic loom.
Well, she didn't always have the pneumatic loom. Actually,
that's pretty big.
That's true. And eventually the normal one went down to the living room anyhow.
Oh,
anyhow. So, but no, just thinking about that being like, craft the world in your image. Use whatever space you want to, as long as you can. Don't be afraid to move.
And enjoy what you do.
Oh, yeah.
Have fun. Enjoy your craft. I am very, very lucky that I have a wonderful and very understanding family that puts up with my paint and my canvases everywhere, and at times jewelry. So love it. Thank you for that. And Ryan, as always, so much fun talking with you. Absolutely. I enjoyed sharing our studio shenanigans today.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want our listeners to know about where to find you and anything special going on with you right now?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, should I talk about it?
You want to give them some
No, I'm gonna leave you
idea?
all in suspense. It's no, I'm working on actually I've got a new album coming out from Crab Cat very, very soon. I believe that's next week.
Oh, wow.
So that's going to be mighty, mighty exciting. And that's
I'm
all stuff that's
excited
been made in my studio.
Yeah.
That I built using 0 live recorded audio.
That's
So that shows you how important the microphone stuff is. All that stuff is computer music, or like just straight synthesizer into computer music. So anyhow, but Karlana, do you have anything you would like to tell our listeners?
I do. You guys can join me every Wednesday live on Facebook.
Whoa.
In my little studio here. Whoa. And I do artwork. We talk about art. We go through stuff. Sketch with me, where we'll take a project and go through it together. Talk about all the good stuff coming up, and you get a behind the scenes look at my latest projects. And also, if you want to find out about special events and giveaways and games and all kinds of stuff that I'm doing online, just head over to karlana.com and sign up for my newsletter. You get a newsletter every other week, and it tells you where I am and what I'm doing and how you can get involved with a whole bunch of different fun things. So join me there.
Well, that sure sounds like a whole boatload of fun, Karlana.
It sure is.
Well, and I would like to thank everyone for joining the How Do Artists live stream podcast. On behalf of myself and Karlana Pedersen, we would like to say so long until next week, same time, same place. Bring your questions, your curiosity, and we will see you around then.
See you then.
Wait. Oh, no.